Good morning, everyone. This is Amber Fornaciari. I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hopefully you can hear everything that I'm saying to you right now and can see the screen. Just as a reminder and for some housekeeping items today, you have been muted. This is a webinar, so we want to make sure that everyone can view and hear the screen. And if you need to communicate with the presenters, you can use the question feature. The question feature will allow you to ask a question and get a response from one of our great presenters on today. Not only are Anita, my colleague, and I going to be presenting for you today, but we have most of the Professional Development Network on the line with us, ready to answer any questions you have. So please feel free to use that question feature. Also, if you lose your audio or video connection, the best troubleshooting tip I have for you is to try exiting and entering again. Sometimes that reset will really help you as you are trying to navigate this webinar today. So once again, you have been muted, and also please use the question feature if you have any questions. Welcome to our webinar today with I Have Online ABE-ASE Resources. Now what? We are here to support you, and just like this tree needs a little help, we are here to lift you up and support you in this time where we are charting uncharted waters. So you can keep apprised of all the upcoming distance learning opportunities by visiting our website, Excellence in Adult Ed, and there's even a new section on there, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but just for distance learning resources. You can also find us on Facebook or Instagram with the hashtag you see down there in blue. One item that is fairly new to the Excellence site that we wanted to point out, and we are going to reference today, is the top 10 resources to get you started with adult education distance learning. The Professional Development Network developed a spreadsheet for you. It only lists 10 resources, and that is very purposeful. We wanted to give you 10 things that you could reach for right away and get access to, and a little bit of information about each of these things. On your screen, you should see a quick screenshot of some of the things that are on this top 10 list, and we tried to organize them in the ways that made the best sense for distance learning. Again, this document, or the link to this document, can be found on the Excellence site in the Distance Learning Resources section. So let's talk a little bit about distance learning. I'm sure this is your favorite topic and the one that you've been spending most of your time on. And Anita and I today want to make sure that you know that Rome was not built in a day, right? That's something that my grandmother always used to say to me. Rome was not built in a day, and neither will your distance learning classroom. And that's okay. We all know that when we get things started, sometimes things are a little rocky, and we always improve. And that's part of professional development and what we do. Throughout the last few weeks, Anita and I, as well as the rest of the PDN staff, have been learning probably just as many things as you have about distance learning, the best ways, and how we could best serve our field. So keep this in mind. Rome was not built in a day, and neither will your distance learning classroom. So we have to start somewhere though, right? So let's start smart. Today our webinar is going to focus on transitioning in-person classroom instruction to online instruction using some of those resources that I mentioned to you. We don't assume that any of us have this figured out yet. We know that we're all working quickly to get our students and ourselves up and running at a distance format. So today our goal is to help you make this maybe a little bit smoother. So what's our agenda for today? We're going to teach you a 4-step process for moving instruction from in-person to at-a-distance delivery. We're going to practice this process with a sample lesson, and we're going to get ideas from fellow teachers that you can apply immediately. I'd like to mention that both Anita and I are fellow adult education teachers in the field right now, and we have another teacher that'll join us later on today who is also in the midst of trying to make this happen. So we're trying to give you information that will best help you, and to know that it's from people in the field that are doing just what you're doing. So let's start with this 4-step process. The first thing I want you to think about, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about this, what do you already have? For instance, many instructors were in the middle of a semester or the middle of a term or the middle of a lesson when your program closed. So you might need to take a closer look at your course objectives, your plans, maybe even your syllabus, and think about what concepts are still essential for students to learn in the time that is left. All of you are dealing with different timelines. I know for me and my fellow teachers at ECC, we only have about 2 weeks left in the semester. So that impacts what you might put on distance learning compared to someone who maybe has 6 or 8 weeks left in the semester. Those are all important things to consider when you're trying to move your live classroom instruction to an online format. Also think about what are the essential things that you really want them to know before your term or your semester or your time with them is over. What are your goals for your students in this time of distance learning? And that may look different for every single classroom in the state. All right, so in regards to what do you already have? Do you have textbooks that you could use? Do you have online publisher materials, things like iPathways, Burlington English, anything from New Readers Press or Essential Education maybe? Do you have OERs or some which are open education resources available to you? Maybe you have one that you really like. Many of those things that we put on our top 10 resources list are OERs or online publisher resources. So that's part of the reason that we put it there for you. It's a great tool to use as you navigate these waters. So I want to give you an example of a quick math lesson that how I start building a quick math lesson from a live classroom kind of idea to a online distance learning classroom. The first thing that I considered was, okay, I needed to teach an introduction to positive and negative numbers. And typically I would reach for this book because that's what I have access to. What do I already have? I have access to this book. And I happen to have it at home, which I realize for some of you, you may or may not have access at home. So you might have to rely on something else you already have access to, but I happen to have this book at home. The lesson that I typically pull from is listed at the top there. It's Unit 1, Numbers and Properties. There's some and the 3 things that I usually focus on from this book are vocabulary, placing integers on a number line, and comparing and ordering integers. Those are the 3 things that are covered in the PDF that I have copied for my students. Now, I do want to caution you that when you're using textbook resources, you do need to abide by copyright law. That can usually be found in the first few pages of the textbook you're using. And in this time, if you send a quick email to the publisher asking for permission to use it in your online classroom, many of them are giving that permission because of the times we're in. So please adhere to your copyright laws. I do have permission to have this on my screen. Things like, could you scan the pages from the book? Would students have access to print? Would it be better to recreate the material in an online format? Those are all options when you have a textbook like this. So if I'm starting with this specific lesson, I have a lesson that has embedded vocabulary. It has a fill in the blank number line activity, and it has instructions for how to use the greater than and less than symbols in regards to integers, positive and negative numbers. It also has questions or problems assigned for each of those areas. So how do I take that and make it into an online lesson? Because it's sitting here as a textbook, and there's some really nice things that I like about this particular textbook. Well, I've started with my textbook, but I already know that there's going to be some gaps in the knowledge, and that's the second step. What other resources do you need to fill gaps with this book? When I teach with this book in my classroom, I fill in with different things. Even in my live classroom, I don't just use the book. So why wouldn't I do that in an online format? One of the things, or one of the resources that you could use specifically for math, if you are trying to fill a gap, is a resource called Math Antics. Some of you may or may not be familiar with Math Antics. It is one of our top 10 resources on that spreadsheet I showed you earlier. This is a screenshot of what the homepage looks like. It is a free resource. There is an option for $10 for an entire year to gain access to the worksheets that he supplies, but the videos themselves are free. In fact, they're also all on YouTube. So if you're worried about closed captioning or accessibility, you can access all of these videos, or your students can access all these videos through YouTube as well. And the links are right on the website. Math Antics is a series of videos specifically for math. And when I use these even in my classroom, sometimes my students will say things like, okay, that guy's a little crazy about math. And he is. You can tell that he really has a passion for what he does, and he tries to make his videos engaging. And while they're engaging and he uses lots of graphics and pictures and sometimes some slapstick or funny humor, they're still appropriate for adults. And I think that that's really important. In these videos, he also illustrates math concepts in ways that I hadn't even thought to do in my own classroom. So I feel like they're very valuable tools for teaching math in the classroom or online. On the website for Math Antics, you'll see a listing of all the topics of the different videos that are here. And when I'm planning this lesson about numbers and integers, positive and negative, I specifically found the area that talks about integer arithmetic. And the video that I chose for this, that I would choose for this specific lesson to go with the textbook I already have, is this negative numbers video. It's about 7 minutes long, and it would give students a good foundation outside of what they would read in the text that I would provide for them. Another resource that I like to pull from in the classroom and in my distance learning plan is Khan Academy. My colleague and I, Anita, thought, does anyone not know about Khan Academy? Because it's been such a prevalent resource in the education world for a long time. Khan Academy is a database of many subjects made for a wide range of grade levels, even higher education. But it is also a really great resource for math. That is one area that they have really robust practice videos, problem sets for students who are learning math at all levels. So this is another resource that I would bring in to my distance learning plan. So we talked about, what do you already have? What do you still need to fill in the gaps? The third step is, are you choosing synchronous learning or asynchronous or a combination of both? Those are options when you're teaching in a distance learning classroom. Let me explain some of these words and give you a better understanding of what exactly they are. First of all, asynchronous learning means it's self-paced for the student. It also means that the student can access it at any time. They don't have to be online at a specific date and time, but rather It's the instructions are laid out for them and the expectations are laid out for them, and then they are returning work in a manner of your choosing. Most adult education students are going to need assistance getting started with this form of distance learning, but at some point they could be independent. There's some advantages to asynchronous learning. One advantage is the teacher prepares the course materials before students access it. And then, of course, students access it when they choose. So when they're off of work, or when their children aren't doing e-learning, or when they aren't busy cooking with their families right now. It can allow for more accessibility. It also allows for self-paced learning. Students can slow down when they need to. They can take their time with a specific video or problem set. Some of the disadvantages of asynchronous learning is that there's fewer personal exchanges and course material could easily be misunderstood. So when you're providing outside resources, sometimes it's hard for students to find the connection between them. And that's what you miss in asynchronous learning. Not to say that it's bad or good, it's what's best for you as an instructor and what's best for what your students need. So let me show you an example of an asynchronous lesson specifically on this topic of integers. One tip that I want to give you is to provide an instruction page if you're choosing asynchronous learning or synchronous learning for students to easily follow. This would include things like, what are your objectives for today? What are you supposed to do step by step by step? And if you put it in a PDF format or a Google Doc, it's easily shared and many students can view it through their phone, through a computer, so on and so forth. So let me show you what an example of an asynchronous lesson might be. So here is an asynchronous lesson that I put together on introducing integers with the resources that I already explained. I'm making it bigger for you. Give me just a second. One of the things that you want to make sure you include is your contact information. How can an instructor reach you, or how can a student reach you if they need to? I also put objectives here. So students will define vocabulary and use in their problems as needed. They will place integers on a number line, and they will compare and order integers using strategies presented. And then here is their list of instructions. You can see here that I have things like view and read page 1 and 2 of the document. And there's a direct link in the instructions, so students just have to refer to one instruction document. And then I have, okay, now go ahead and answer those questions on page 2 of the document and email me your responses or text them to me. I've had students do this with just taking a picture of what they wrote. I've also had students who are more technology proficient type these out and send them to me. You can see the third step is to watch a video. This is the Math Antics video that I told you about. One quick side note about videos. In our society, or in our world, students watch videos for different reasons. Most of the time, we as people watch videos for entertainment. We watch a cool YouTube video. We watch somebody doing a funny parody of Zoom meetings, right? That's what I watched last night. We need to teach our students how to watch a video for learning. So this could be an entire lesson in itself. When you're trying to learn something new from a video, you need to do things like pause it when you don't understand and rewind. Rewatch it if you kind of forgot what they were talking about. And take notes as needed. You can see in my plan, then students have to refer back to that document and then do some practice on Khan Academy. Something to note about Khan Academy is there's kind of two ways to use it. You can pick and choose individual things to use like I did here, where students are just going to practice with this specific practice set. Or you can use it as almost a learning management system where you have students in your class, you can see what they're doing. And Anita's going to talk more about how to do that in a little bit. You can see as my lesson goes on, they read two more pages of the PDF document, and then they go back to Khan Academy and do these specific lessons. And then at the end, remember to text or call me or email me if you have any questions or need help. It's important that students know that you're available for them when you're in this distance learning mode. So this is an example of an asynchronous lesson. You can see on Khan Academy, this is what it looks like when a student would go to Khan Academy with the lesson that I presented to you. Here's the lesson, and then here are those 4 titles that I asked them to do. So if you spell out the instructions very clearly, it might take them a little bit the first couple times they do it, but then they will be good to go. So what is synchronous learning? Synchronous learning is kind of what we're doing right now. It's a live classroom. It's real time. I'm in my office right now talking to you. And if I wasn't trying to use all the bandwidth in my house, I might even show you my webcam, right? But let me give you something to think about with synchronous learning. It requires what Brené Brown calls building a container, meaning before you teach the content, you need to provide students with how the virtual classroom will work. How does it work? And I want to give you a really quick example because I just did it this morning with my kindergarten student. Her teacher was communicating her through a virtual platform, video and sound. And my 5-year-old, she was teaching all of these 5-year-olds, the teacher was, how to mute and unmute. How to mute and unmute. And they practiced it several times. And then they practiced how to raise their hand. And then, just with some simple math problems like 1 + 2, they practiced how to mute and unmute individually. These kinds of skills are not just good for my 5-year-old. These are things that everybody needs to learn when they're communicating through a virtual classroom platform. Again, most adult education students are going to need help when they're getting online with a synchronous learning platform, and they will likely need support continuously through those live sessions. Brené Brown also suggests in her article that small chunks of information are best when you're teaching synchronously. No more than 30 minutes online. Those of you who are sitting in this webinar today, in about 10 minutes, some of you are going to get a little antsy. And hopefully Anita will capture your attention and you'll be able to continue on your learning process. But synchronous learning where students are giving and taking back and forth should really be contained to small chunks, even if it means you do several small chunks throughout the day. What are some advantages for synchronous learning? First of all, students get immediate personal engagement. They get the feeling that you can hear them, they can hear you, and you are giving feedback back and forth. There's a greater feeling of community. When my 5-year-old got online this morning with her classmates and that she hadn't seen for a few weeks, the look on her face was amazing. Seeing somebody's face or hearing voices is a great activity right now in our time of isolation. More responsive exchanges about content. It is easy for me as a teacher to say, yes, 5 + 3 is correct. It is 8 when you're in this kind of synchronous learning environment. However, there are some disadvantages to synchronous learning. It can be difficult to schedule for everyone. Maybe not everyone is available anymore because their work schedule has changed or they're trying to help their own students with e-learning. There can also be technical challenges, which some of you might have even faced getting on this webinar. So how could I take an asynchronous lesson and make it a combination of these methods? The lesson that I showed you earlier that was asynchronous, I took it and I made it into a combination of synchronous and asynchronous. If my students were ready for this and I felt like I could do this, I might, instead of having them do more independently, I might have something where they're viewing and reading that document, watching the video, and then we get on a video call and we talk about some of the things. Notice that I took out some of the responses that they're required to submit to me. And then maybe they go on their own and they do 2 pages of the document and practice on Khan Academy, and we get back on at 10:30 and we talk about where are you at? Here's some more content that I want to teach you. And then they go back on Khan Academy and they do their independent work. This is what I see kind of as what I would try to do, but you might have to start with asynchronous learning first. This is just an example of how you can use, or two lessons that you can use with moving to distance learning, and how you could combine this idea of asynchronous and synchronous in order to serve your students the best that you can. Now, Anita is going to come on, and she is going, oh, I'm sorry, not quite yet, she's not. How are you going to give feedback? This is really important. I already mentioned some things that you can do to give feedback in the lessons that I talked about. For instance, you noticed that students were taking pictures of their work or submitting answers via a document online. When you're giving feedback, it's important that you give it promptly, or as promptly as you can, so students are still feeling connected to the classroom. Giving feedback could look different for each student. You could be giving feedback through a text, through a phone call, through an email. If you have access to an LMS, a learning management system, and that's where you're putting all of this information, that is a great way to give feedback. Another way to give feedback is through a content resource system. What we mean by that is something like Khan Academy, where you can see what the students are working on, you can assign them things, and then you can respond to what they're doing. Anita's going to talk more about this when she talks about how to integrate language arts into a distance learning classroom. So let's review and apply that thinking process, those 4 steps, with a specific online resource.
Hey everybody. So I'm really grateful to Amber for giving us an overview of this 4-step process. So what we want to do now is we want to review and apply that 4-step process using one specific online resource that some of you may already be familiar with, but one that certainly I use and really find useful. So we're going to walk through again this process of moving from in-person to online instruction. And perhaps you might want to jot down some notes as we go, thinking about your own ideas and how this could work for your planning. I do want to just emphasize and encourage you that, remember, we're talking about skills today that you're learning as a teacher that are going to be transferable skills, meaning even if you don't plan on using commonlit.org in your classroom, the idea, the process, the thinking behind what we're going to do is transferable to any resource that you would be using. So be flexible in the way you take this information in. And if the exact resource doesn't match up, the process behind it will. So hopefully this will be as practical and as useful as it can be for you. So let's start with Amber's first step. What do you already have? In this case, we have commonlit.org, which is a great web-based resource for reading texts and having mini lessons that go with. So CommonLit is free. Anybody can build an account, both teachers and students, and then you can assign text to your students and you can track their progress and give feedback within the system. Now, I will tell you this is not going to be a how to use CommonLit webinar today because we're worried more about process than we are about one platform. But there are plenty of online helps on the CommonLit website if you want to dig deeper. This resource is free. The content includes fiction and informational texts and plenty of science and social studies topics at grade levels ranging from 3 to 12. Both teachers and students would click that free account button here, and it simply requires a name an email address, and for you to create a password for the account. Once you as a teacher have created your class, have created your account, then you can create a new class. And when you do that, you give it a name, and then you get a class code here generated for you automatically, and you will then share that class code with your students. That is what you will give them when they build their account. They will put your class code in and it will automatically put them on your roster. Now, this is useful. The system makes it really easy for you to build multiple classes for different sections of courses you have, or you can put everybody in one. But it is a very simple process to create an account, create a class, and then easy for you to track their work within that. Now, Common Lit is organized as a text library, and it's searchable by each of the categories that you see over here on the left panel. So you can search by Lexile or grade level, by theme, genre, even by the standard that you are trying to teach. You can search by that for texts. And on the picture of each text, as you see here, you'll see a green strip with the grade level and also the type or genre of text that it is. Each text has accompanying assessments and discussion questions that are built in and ready to use. The other thing that Common Lit has that you might want to take advantage of are ready-to-use units by grade, and they include teacher resources like graphic organizers, built-in assessments, and built-in texts. So this is a happiness unit. It's designed to take 1 to 2 weeks, depending on how much work you want to assign. And there's a 7th grade reading level here. There are several texts included. I believe there are 9 assignments with text and then 1 final assignment. So you could assign an entire unit to your students, or you can simply assign individual text and question sets to them. So that's our step 1. That's what we have is Common Lit. But what other resources am I going to need in order to fill those gaps, right? Meaning, if I were going to be teaching face-to-face, I know I would be doing certain activities, certain focus points. I would really emphasize things in my in-person. I don't want to lose all of that when I move to my online delivery. So in my case, I want to concentrate on differentiation with you today. That is a gap that I'm going to need to fill. And so I need to concentrate on how I'm going to be able to differentiate for my students when I'm working in Common Lit. So in my case, let's say I'm assigning a text that I know might be a little challenging for some of my students. Let's say I choose the Nobel acceptance speech by Martin Luther King Jr. That's a great text that's available in here, but it's at an 11th grade reading level. And so if I want to use that content, I might need to stop and think to myself, how should I differentiate for my students so everybody has success with this lesson? So first things first, think about what you would do in your classroom. Common Lit has lots of differentiation tools that are built in that I can use, but I will have to be conscious about choosing and using them. As well, I'll have to make sure my students are aware of them and know how to use them. So my first example of how to do this is the idea of text sets, which are built into the library of Common Lit, where there's a collection of texts on similar topics over a range of reading materials and reading levels. So for instance, this civil rights movement text set has 34 texts that range from 4th grade to 12th grade, all circling the same topic. So my first option for differentiation is to assign struggling readers in my class a different Martin Luther King text than the Nobel speech, right? You can see the green band on the screen showing you the grade level for each text available. So just as during an in-person class, you might have some students working, for instance, in a book that's TABE level D focused. I've got a student across the room who's using a TABE level E book, but I can have them working on the same topic, both studying the environment or whatever. I can do the same thing in Common Lit. And again, I just have to be conscious about choosing that as I am making my plans. Now, there are other ways that we can think about differentiation to fill that gap when I'm doing online delivery. Common Lit has a toolbar of supports, and you see the options here that are already built into the system. There's a dictionary, there's an audio recording of every text that students can choose to listen while they read. There's a translation feature that you can highlight a section of text and it will translate into a variety of languages, including Spanish and French and German and Czech, and there's a whole bunch if that's a need for your students. There's also an annotating and a highlighting tool for students who need to be thinking kind of out loud, so to speak, as they walk through a text. The nice thing about these tools is that students can control the amount of support they need for that assignment. You can tell them they're available. You could even recommend for a specific student, this support tool would be really good for you to use. But the student can decide how much help they need while they're reading and working. And that's a really valuable strategy when we're talking about scaffolding. Now, there's also a media tab with the texts that students can click and they can view either pick images or videos that are connected to the theme of the text. That can be really valuable too for students who are looking for enrichment activities or just that supplemental work. Now, before we look at this third column, I do want to ask ourselves, let's think back to our goal of step 2. What would I normally do during an in-person class that I'm trying to replicate for distance learning? So let's say you would generally read the text out loud and you would stop at intervals throughout to ask summarizing questions or thought-provoking questions, and then you'd have students move on after they answered. You could have students use the guided reading option that's built into each text, and that replicates the experience by prompting students to stop at certain intervals, and it directs them to answer a question about that section before they keep reading. That's a great scaffold that Common Lit has built in that you might not be aware of, and if you aren't, you're going to miss it. But if you are aware, you can tell your students it's there and you can encourage them to use it as part of that support and scaffold we need to give them. Now, the other part of step 2 in our process is what are the other gaps? So a couple quick things. We need to be checking student work and monitoring their progress. And we also want to encourage group discussion. And if those are the other gaps that I want to accommodate for, I want to concentrate on these first 2. And it's thankfully very easy to do in Common Lit. You're prompted to grade assignments. You can see here this little red 1. You have 1 short answer response to grade. That will be given to me on what's called the teacher dashboard under the assignments tab. And when I see that, I know I have student work to grade. The assignment report, you'll see, has 2 parts. The top part you're seeing right now. This shows the class averages, the score breakdown, etc. for each assignment. And what's nice about this is it'll give you an idea at a quick glance. Did my students get it or did they not get it? Sometimes that's a pretty easy assessment to make when you're in the classroom right with your students. When you're online doing asynchronous learning, that's a lot tougher. And so this assignment report will allow you to do that tracking at a distance. Now, the other part of the report that can be useful is this part where you can see individual student scores. My students did not do great on this assignment. When the questions are, the question choices, D, C, etc., are in red, they got it wrong. When they're in green, they got it right. You'll see their total score, and you'll also see over there in the 5th column, there's information over there related to the short answer, where I had to grade it myself. This is a great monitoring system. It allows you to see who has submitted, who has incomplete assignment here, and any who were exempted, meaning you didn't assign that group this text. This is just a nice way to track your information. And again, if you're looking for something that'll allow you to have some of the same control over the information in your classroom that you had in person, this can be a good option. Now, the other piece that you might be thinking, but the other thing I want to include in my online instruction is group discussion. And you may think that's going to be a lot harder to do in an online environment. And you're right, it sure can be harder, but it's not impossible. Common Lit does not have a discussion board feature at this point, but it does have 3 discussion questions approximately that are provided for each text that are already written and ready to go. So I wouldn't have to prepare any questions, but I would have to figure out how to get my students discussing them. So what I want to do is put a poll up, and I want to ask you to answer the question, how would you try to get your students into a group discussion? I've got my discussion questions that have been given to me within Common Lit, but what would I do? Would you choose some of those discussion questions and send them out by text, maybe in a WhatsApp or a Remind, and have everybody reply to the group? Would you try to hold a live Zoom meeting and ask your students to come prepared to discuss those questions? Or would you post some of those questions on a discussion board in a learning management system, perhaps, and have students respond to each other in writing? I'll give you just a second to finish voting in your poll. You can click right on the screen to do so. And I'll give you one more second to finish that, and then I'll show you. Yeah, this is great. The poll results, it looks like 55% of you said to hold a live Zoom meeting and talk out loud in live time with each other would be your choice. I agree with you. I think that's great. As Amber pointed out, there's so much great connection and community that can be built in those live meetings. Be a wonderful choice. Several of you said you would send your discussion questions through a WhatsApp or a Remind and maybe have them reply to the group. That's a written conversation that we know doesn't happen live, but can still be beneficial, right? Great. Thank you so much for doing that participation with me. The idea is that we can, we have lots of options, right? I would just encourage us not to be too, let's try to be open-minded about the way we would try to do some things. For instance, let's think about this step 3 in our process, synchronous or asynchronous. Now, when you're using Common Lit, that system is really built for asynchronous learning, for students to be working independently on their own. Most teachers are probably going to use it that way. They assign text, let them work at their pace, submit by a due date. But as our last poll question just showed, you could easily combine synchronous elements into your planning and into your lesson so that you do have that community building and live opportunity time. Now, it's certainly not required that you have both of those elements in every lesson that you do, but do consider that if you're using a resource like Common Lit or ReadWorks or iPathways or something that is asynchronous primarily, you and your students would likely benefit a great deal by adding some live interaction as well, however that works for you. One other quick issue that I just want to raise here, you see my little envelope down here in the middle of the screen. Common Lit has printable PDFs of the text, the question sets, and the discussion questions for every text in its library. These are printable and they come out beautifully, nice and clean. They even include the picture. And then you could mail them, snail mail, to students who need, who don't have access to technology. This is a possibility. You could always mail them the hard copy. They could fill in their answers, take a picture of it, and text back to you their responses. We just want to be mindful of the fact that not all of our students do have that technology, and we're going to have a webinar next week that's going to deal with that more specifically, but I just wanted to make sure we mention that so it doesn't get away from us. Now, step 4, the final step in our process of moving our instruction online is giving feedback to students. Now, in class, think about what you might have done. You would have collected their papers, graded any multiple choice, written comments on a writing response, and handed the papers back. Now, so how are we going to replicate that in an online or at a distance environment? So in Common Lit, the system automatically grades your multiple choice answers, which is awesome. You just have to make sure that you release the student scores, which is on the dashboard. It's an option you'll see when you're grading. Students will then be able to see the results. The other thing is to remember that that blue column on the right is the writing question, and you'll notice that those grades are a little different. Some people got 2 out of 4, some people got 4 out of 4. I graded those myself, and this is where a feedback piece that's really important is built in. So I want to show you what it looks like when you're grading the writing response. At the top of the screen, you'll see the original prompt and some publisher notes about what a good, thorough response to this question would be. Then beneath that, you'll see what you see on your screen right now. See the student's name, the student's written response, and then a score range from 0 to 4 that you can select your grade, and then you can type your comments and hit save. The student then, once you release the scores, can see not only their multiple choice results, but they can see their score out of 4 on their writing prompt and your comments. This is really valuable because when they get ready to think about what they did right or wrong, those written comments from you are valuable, right? Way better than just a numeric score. So I really like that feature. And if you're using a system that doesn't have that built in, you might consider how you want to provide written comments to student work, whether through text or over the phone or however. One other way to do feedback very quickly is this unsubmit option here in the middle. If students do really poorly, and in this case, I see 2 of mine did, one got 10% correct, one got 15%. I can make an assumption that they maybe didn't read very carefully, or maybe they were just really struggling. I can hit that unsubmit button. It will delete the student assignment, and then the system prompts them to redo it. They can see their previous choices and choose the correct one. They can also see your notes and your feedback on their writing, and they can redo that writing sample. That gives you a couple of ways, through the writing assignment, through the unsubmit option, to offer student feedback in this online environment, which is step 4 of our 4-step plan. That feedback piece, our students need that from us, and that's how so much of our instruction occurs. And when you don't have them right there in front of you, I know how hard it is. You guys miss that piece, that human connection piece. You want it so much. So as best we can, let's replicate that in the online space. And you can be as creative as you would like about how that will look. Now, I do hope that you're encouraged by a lot of these ideas that you heard from Amber and myself, that this is doable. But again, it wasn't done in a day. Nobody's plan is going to be perfect, and that's okay. What we want to do, though, is show you real quickly right now one other option for how you can move some activities online. And we're so grateful that a seasoned instructor like Mary Claire Sullivan has joined us today, and she's going to share just very briefly her experience of moving instruction from in-person to online. So Mary Claire, I'm really happy to have you today. Will you share with us?
Hi, good morning. I'm glad to be here. So this is a bit of a challenge for all of us, right? I'm sure we've all spent a lot of time trying to move our classes from in-class or face-to-face to remote learning. So my class, the class that I'm going to feature this morning, is a mixed level class, and students have been using iPathways and Reading Plus. We also have Blackboard to use. But now that we're learning remotely, not all of my students have access to desktops, laptops, tablets. So pretty much I have to rely on the cell phone. So basically all you will need, or all a student would need to complete a portion of this lesson would be cell phone connectivity data. So this is just, if they have a laptop or if they have a desktop, even better. It'll make the assignment that much more easier to complete. So let's look at this next slide. This lesson that I'm featuring today is a follow-up, or we're scaffolding on the last face-to-face class that we had together. So students have prior knowledge of how to read and unpack informational texts. They can identify key ideas or main ideas and key supporting evidence. They're familiar with online resources such as Newsela. I love to use thesaurus.com and dictionary.com. They always have these features open on their desktops when they're in class to use throughout the class. So this group of students, they're a mixed level. So they range from NRS 3 to NRS 5. So it's somewhat difficult to accommodate all of those learning levels and skill levels. For this particular activity, this being our first week back from spring break and our new remote learning situation, I chose to do a mid-level activity with the thought that most students would be able to complete this without too much difficulty. Moving on for the next 4 to 5 weeks, I will be doing more of a differentiation, and I'll be assigning various levels depending on the student's skills. So let's go on to the next screen. So here, my colleagues and I did a bit of a survey with our students. We contacted them to determine what type of devices they had at home, if they had internet connectivity. And there were quite a few students that didn't have access to tablets or to laptops, but everybody does have a cell phone. So this particular lesson that I'm going to show you just needs a cell phone. So I set up a Google Voice account, which I never had before, and I practiced on it. I did some testing with my family, my kids, just to get familiar with the features. And then after I became comfortable with it, I sent my students this particular message. So you can read it, it's up on your screen. But to let them know that this is how we were going to be communicating from this point forward. Normally we would do it through email and through Blackboard announcements, but because not everybody has those devices to do that, this is how we're doing it. And then I asked my students to respond and to let me know that they got the message. So I had only been in contact with about, maybe a third of my students prior to this. After sending this text message, all but one student got back to me. So cell phones are key in this new environment. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. After I received responses from my students, I then put together a lesson plan. And you can see with my message here, I had 3 apps that I asked my students to download. All of them are free, one being Blackboard, the other one is Newsela, and the third is Quizlet. Now my students are familiar with all 3 of these online platforms as we use them in class, but using them on a cell phone is a little bit different. So I gave students time to go ahead and do that and to download them. And then I also I took screenshots of what these apps look like so that they could be sure when they were actually going to the App Store that they were downloading the correct ones. Okay, so we'll go on to the next screen. So for this webinar today, I chose activity 2 in my lesson plan, and because all students would require to complete this activity would be a cell phone. And this current assignment can be adjusted. You can customize it and use it for language arts, for social studies, for science. And remember, this is only one portion of my lesson plan for the week. It's the easiest to convey in this webinar. So students had prior knowledge of these platforms in class, but navigating these on a cell phone is really kind of difficult. And so I'm taking that into account, and I'm giving them plenty of time to do that individually. And so I'm going to be very patient, and I started very small so as not to overwhelm them in this new learning environment. We'll go on to the next screen. So here is a picture of the mobile app. It's a photo of the Newsela phone app as it appears in the App Store. And this picture was also included with photos of the Blackboard app and Quizlet. Okay, so once the students downloaded that and downloaded the 3 apps, I then sent them another Google Voice text message. And these were the instructions just for this one particular activity that I sent to my students, along with a photo of what the screenshot of the Newsela window would look like when they actually accessed it. So students were instructed to open their Newsela app and join our class. And our class had been created at the beginning of the semester. And so there were probably only 2 or 3 students who hadn't accessed that prior to this message. So there's my class code. I assigned an article, Sewing Needed Face Masks. So don't think that I'm dropping my students into this COVID-19 situation without any prior discussion or knowledge. This activity is scaffolding on our last face-to-face class. We did a COVID-19 activity where students watched a video. They completed a graphic organizer indicating what prior knowledge they had of this coronavirus situation, where they got their news. Did they read it online? Did they listen to broadcasts? Did they discuss this issue with family and friends? I then had students read an informational text, a little brief passage, and then indicate what they learned on their organizer and how they would use this knowledge at home, at work, or at school. And then I had them write a short paragraph. So this is supplementing that or moving that lesson along. So I then instructed students to read the article and to record vocabulary words in their blank vocabulary log. Students are instructed to put those terms in their own words after looking them up online on dictionary.com. They're also asked to write them in their native language if they feel the need, or to draw a little graphic or a picture to help them remember what the vocabulary is. And then at the end of the assignment, there's a quiz. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, and so if you look, there's the assignment title, the text level. I chose this mid-range level for students to do initially. As we move on, the software Newsela will adjust and assign students text at their appropriate level. But I just wanted to get things started uniformly this first time when we work remote. And then I instructed the students to take a picture of their vocabulary log and their quiz answers so that I could have a look at them and provide feedback later on. So here's what students would see when they get ready to start the activity. Okay. We can move on to the next one. So really quick, these are the assessments. So students will take a photograph of their vocabulary log and send it to me via text. They will also send me their quiz answers, and I can actually look up those quiz answers online. The other assessment, and what I think is the most important one here, is the fact that students being able to follow these complicated directions and download these various applications, follow my text directions, communicate with me via Google Voice. That's a pretty big feat for this initial week back to class after spring break and not being in a face-to-face environment. So that fulfills many, many requirements if you're looking at your Common Core standards, which I know everybody does, right? Okay, so if we move on to the final screen here, I will provide feedback right away as soon as I get the information from my students and their text messages. I'll message each student individually and I'll comment on their work. And so next week, I'm going to schedule a short Zoom meeting. This will be the first time that we've ever used Zoom together as a class. And it's going to be very brief. And I'm just going to get students acclimated, like Amber brought up with her kindergartner. I'm just going to get them familiar with the site, you know, how to respond, what's appropriate. I will include some netiquette and some short videos in the future that indicate how students should behave in these virtual environments, what's appropriate and what isn't. I will poll my students and ask them what worked out, what didn't, what can I do to make these assignments easier in the future. Now, granted, this is only one of 3. And then I also will ask their input on how we should go moving forward. I will inquire about how they're doing, how their families are they feeling overwhelmed, and I'll take all of that into account. So that's just one portion of my week's activities for my students in this particular class. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Claire. I really appreciate your time and also your realism. I think we all need to hear that your understanding of your students' progress includes their understanding and learning of this technology, and I appreciate that feedback a lot. Will our out-of-distance learning always be the same as our in-person? No, of course not. But that doesn't mean it can't be great. So I think we all need to live in this world of flexibility and give ourselves some grace that it's okay when something doesn't go right, and our students will need that same flexibility from us. So we're really appreciative of all of your efforts, and we sympathize with them, and we're here to help. Just keep in mind our Excellence in Adult Ed site that Amber mentioned. All of those resources, including the top 10 resource, all archived webinars, and all future webinars for which you can register are here, as well as our adult ed discussion boards, where we've got some activity of teachers sharing information back and forth there. We hope that you'll participate. Also, check out on the same site, but through the Special Learning Needs blog, there are some great ideas about accessibility. We encourage you to check those out as well. We're very appreciative of your time today. You will get a certificate for 1 hour of PD for your attendance today, and that will come to you by email. If you don't receive it by next Friday, you can let us know at that web address. But we're really grateful for your time, and there will be a recording of this webinar posted on the Excellence site, and we encourage you to reference it at any point. Feel free to give Amber or myself or any of our PD staff at the network get us an email, give us a phone call. We'll be happy to give you help as you continue in your journey of moving your materials from in-person to online. And we wish you great luck doing that, guys. Have a great day. Thank you so much.